Today I'm at 45 White Oak and we're gonna walk through the entire plumbing system from the 2-inch water line going in to the 4-inch sewer line going out and everything in between. How to set expectations around high quality craftsmanship when we're talking about plumbing install, and what it takes to coordinate a wet wall to make sure fixtures are in the right place, and how to make sure that those high-end fixtures have hot water when you expect them to. So that is a water stop, and that water stop is what controls the flow of water from the street into 45 White Oak. And attached to that is a 2-inch copper line that feeds a water mechanical closet underneath the staircase in the basement of the home. So I'm gonna head inside and we're gonna meet up with the plumber. So with me today is Jim from Lavallee Systems, who did all of the plumbing on the site. I reached out to you over a year ago to do the plumbing on the project.
Yeah.
7,200 square foot, high-end luxury home. But as a plumber, what are those things that you're thinking about when you're not only pricing the project, but planning to actually do the execution on site?
A lot of it starts with the builder themselves, right? So their level of quality and what they look for from their subcontractors. What we want to try to figure out is exactly what's going on in the basement to start, because that's actually where everything begins, and then we kind of work our way up from there. A big thing here that you dealt with was an elevation issue with the sewer, correct?
Primarily driven by the ledge that everyone knows about.
Correct. So that was a big thing. So we went through that, figured out the math, tried to figure out exactly, because we were very limited with pitch. So we made sure that we got that squared away. But those are the things early on that you want to have a conversation about, where the water's coming in. You and I had several conversations about where to bring the water in, right? So bringing it in here underneath in the closet makes sense, because it's able to sit in a space that really it's not going to be in the way of anything else.
Right.
As opposed to running all the way into the mechanical room, which is a little further away and a little more difficult to get the water that far in.
I had asked if we could put all of this into the mechanical room, and one of the things that came up actually was we could, but you really run into the fact that they don't want you coming into the home and then running a long distance to where they essentially would have a meter. Not that we would be dishonest and start plugging off it, but it gives someone the opportunity to tap in before the meter running that risk. Is that right?
That's correct. And then you have all of that piping under the slab, right? As opposed to most of it, typically in your normal residential setting, the water stubs in through the foundation typically. Yep. So you can excavate that entire water line if anything fails and just poke in, 6-8 inches into the foundation and you're in the house.
We have a 2-inch line now. Why 2 inches? What's the requirement there?
So the requirement depends, because some of the houses, they'll actually do fire protection also, right? So that becomes one of the things, so they want to have enough volume of water. And it is a town bylaw, right? So the square footage of these houses, that's what makes them want to bring the 2-inch line in here. Because distribution, as you can see, the distribution is not 2-inch. It's not that large.
Yeah.
Because Mass Plumbing Code doesn't require us to have that large of a diameter of pipe to run to the actual fixtures.
Yeah, and Mass doesn't require a sprinkler system until you hit a certain square footage, which we're under, and we don't have a sprinkler system in this home. I know a lot of you guys have asked. It's just not something that we typically see in residential homes of this size. But also what I heard is that the pressure in the street's really, really low, which I think is why we have this little giant here.
That's correct.
So what's the little giant doing?
So these things are great. It's called a constant pressure pump. So some people are used to working with wells. What happens with a well is the pressure will rise and then drop, rise and then drop. This makes it so the pressure is actually constant. So it's really great. Oddly, in the house it's a good thing, but like your irrigation, it's huge for the irrigation, right? To be able to get up that amount of pressure on a constant basis. They're able to run more heads. There's a lot of that. And then there's the benefit of the showers, right? When somebody goes into shower, you have the old days when someone would flush a toilet or something like that would happen, and you'd have this pressure drop that would happen within the system.
So you mentioned irrigation. So you come through this pump and you head up to 2 meters.
Correct.
Walk me through why we have 2 meters.
Most municipalities charge you for sewer and water. So what this does is actually makes it so you're not charged typically for both sewer and water as it goes, because obviously the irrigation and the outside faucets are typically on the irrigation meter, so you're not charged double for it.
Municipality is going to charge you for the water coming in the home, and based on how much you bring in the home, they're also going to be charging you to remove that water. With the second meter, you're actually bypassing that, and this is essentially saying, well, what's the delta for the water that comes into the home but never gets back out because it's being entered into the irrigation and hose bibs?
Correct. A lot of towns, they don't have to deal with the water ban. So if you put a well in, you don't have to deal with the ban that they typically put in place. Because, last year we had a really tough year for water. Yeah. And that's one of the examples. So, people wind up spending quite a bit of money on their landscape. If you can't get water to it, it can be a disaster. So some people don't want to take that chance, and they'll actually drill their own well, because then they're in control of the water.
And on this site, as you guys know, we dealt with ledge. We're also dealing with a bunch of wetland setbacks, so municipal water was the right choice here. Also, why do we have an expansion tank? What's the reason for that?
The expansion tank, what it does is it allows the excess pressure that's typically built up when you have expansion within the system. So this system itself has a check valve, which is right here. When you heat hot water, it'll expand. With a system like this check valve stops the expansion. So what happens is this will make up the difference, and there's a diaphragm in there that'll actually flex with the pressure. And what that does is it allows that little bit of excess pressure, because if you don't have that on this type of system, you have to have a pressure relief, because this can run and run and run, overpressurize, and you could literally have issues with pipes breaking, different plastic components that you have within the system, so it can turn into quite the disaster. So that's the other thing. With this type of system, the safety precautions of things like this will take a little bit, but if it gets excessive, this pops off and actually dumps water.
So check valve means that water can flow in one direction but can't go back.
That's correct.
So when you're building that pressure in here, if that pump runs abnormally long or there's a fault, you don't want to blow a fitting.
That's correct.
This is going to release at
that releases that pressure. You have the same thing on the hot water heater as well, because a lot of systems that don't require the constant pressure pump won't have this. So what happens is the extra expansion actually expands back out into the water main itself, into the system. So you don't have to deal with the expansion tank.
What's the reason for doing this in copper? I know we're coming into the home with copper. As we're going to walk through the rest of the system, everything else is plastic packs.
Yep. So one of the things is just the rigidity of it and the aesthetic. So sometimes we like to let our guys be a little artistic when it comes to putting something in. And when you do it in copper, right, that's the big thing, right? So these are the areas, unfortunately, most of our stuff gets buried behind the walls and nobody ever knows it's in there. These are those moments where the guys get to actually show off their craft.
We have temporary lighting right now, but I have some nice LED lighting that will showcase as well. Put a nice coat of wax on the copper and it'll be nice looking. So we're going to leave the water closet and head into the mechanical room.
Yep.
So one of the things, Jim, we were talking about just the other week was getting the water heater in.
Yep.
And you had texted me saying, hey, have you coated your floor yet? And I didn't respond to your text.
Right.
Because I didn't coat the floor yet. But as you see today, the floor is ready.
Yep.
First and foremost, I want to call attention to the fact that everything is super nice and neat.
Yes.
There's a big reason why we have really clear communication and set those expectations up front, where if I say, hey, give me a price on the plumbing, and then you come here and the pipes are all over the place and I'm mad about it, it's like, well, it does the job. You know, you didn't say that you wanted this to be artistic. You didn't encourage that. Kudos to the team for taking the time and making everything nice and neat. And that you'll see that throughout the entire home. Is that a standard for you guys?
Absolutely. So what typically happens, and this house is a perfect example of that, because you're following other trades, other subs that do the exact same thing. So the last thing you want to be is that guy that actually, the pipes are crooked, something's not, I mean, you look at the electrical, you look at the HVAC, everything is really, really done well. Yeah. And you want to make sure that you rise to that occasion, which is what we do on a regular basis. So whether we're driving everybody else to do it or they're driving us to do it, we want to make sure we maintain that type of quality for an installation like this.
Yeah, and your team, Matt and your team were on site, and it was down to where stuff terminated, they were super specific and made sure that they not only got our blessing, but like, hey, is this the intent? You know, is this what you guys are looking for? And really bought into the bigger picture here.
You spoiled them a little bit. You were here quite a bit. So that made, Matt was like, wow, we want to keep doing that type of work, because every decision, you're the final decision maker, right? Yeah. So that's another big thing. When you're doing custom stuff like this, you want to have a decision maker, right? Because when you're dealing with architects, designers, and builders, they want a certain product, and it's always good for us to get the answers when we need them.
We're setting these standards, and we're kind of creating a process. So when I reach back out to Jim for a future job, not only does he understand it based on what we've done here, but I'm able to re-communicate a standard that we've set in this project, or even maybe improve upon it, where it's like, hey, I really liked what we did at 45 White Oak, but there's a handful of things I'd like to change.
Yep.
So before we go upstairs, we have the water heater. It is not here.
Future going to have the water heater.
Red is for hot water and blue is for cold water.
You want it to be that way, right? That is the case.
It is strictly a color thing, right? They are not a different material, or are they handling temperature differently, or is it strictly just for visible understanding of what is in that line?
It's for the understanding of the line. So it's one of those things, when you deal with PEX, right, you'll have people go back and forth on PEX and copper, whatever they want to do. I don't want to say it idiot proofs it, but it makes it pretty tough to make the mistakes, right? If you come back after the fact and you're looking at a water line, you get into commercial applications and some real larger high-end homes, they'll actually label a lot of the piping if you get into that. But in this situation, it kind of makes it a little bit simpler for you to understand.
And what about the white?
The white, so the white is just brand specific, so that's Vegas pipe. So their pipe comes in that color, so that's why we use it.
So the home is all electric. We're a 400 amp service. We're not maxed out on that service, which is product of everyone working together. And we're not using a standard electric water heater. We're using a heat pump water heater.
That's correct.
So I know high level how a heat pump works, but walk me through how that particular water heater works.
So the biggest thing is it works very similar to the systems like everybody sees the mini splits that are out now. It's very similar to that type of system. So it uses the refrigeration to heat the hot water. The hybrid system itself is extremely efficient. It may not deliver the exact amount of water that we used to get from a gas unit, but the efficiency is, I believe it's probably 3 times more efficient than your standard gas, and plus the carbon footprint, right? So that's the other big thing. You don't have the emissions that you typically have from a gas-fired unit. There are some downsides, which I think when we get into talking, once the water heater's installed here, I think we'll have a longer conversation about that, and we can talk through that. People have to change their ways, right? So that's the big thing. We have to change our way because you're not going to have as much hot water, but it's for the future, and we should all be working at it. It's
a 5-bedroom home. There's lots of bathrooms here.
Yep.
We have to think about when it's at peak capacity. You're mentioning that maybe this doesn't produce as much hot water, but we're installing things like a recirculating pump.
Yes.
So there's different systems that you can do for water distribution, and it's kind of a manifold system, which we've done in the past, where I kind of reference a electric panel where you kind of go into a panel and then everything branches out and you have individual shutoffs for every room and or fixture.
Yep.
But this line could be really, really long to get to bathroom 5. Correct. And maybe not so much the cold, but when it's hot, it can take a really long time to get hot. So on a recirculating pump, my understanding is that you basically feed the whole house with a loop of hot water.
That's correct. Usually we'll run to our furthest fixture depending on the type of house. So a house this big sometimes will have multiple returns coming back depending on what we're doing. But a lot of times what you do is you go to your furthest fixture, and what that does is that keeps the main line having warm water or hot water at all times. So then you have to think about how close you are to that main. So when you're doing back to the layout, right, the design of the house, we have to make sure we're thinking about the hot water being fed to those fixtures. Because that component is one of the pieces that you really do want to pay attention to in a house, because everything we're doing now is based on energy usage, right?
Sure.
So you don't want to have a lot of extra pipes sitting there, and you don't want people waiting for hot water. That's one of the major inconveniences.
Yeah.
People think of it all the time as an inconvenience, but really it's waste, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. You're wasting a lot of water.
Well, yeah, truthfully, I've never really thought of it that way. I'm always thinking about clients just telling me, hey, it takes me 1 minute and 30 seconds to get hot water. And when the reality is but you've also just dumped 5 gallons of water. A 1/2-inch line like this running to its furthest point, just how much water that is before you get the water that's here, that's warm, to your fixture.
That's correct.
And not only that, but you're paying for the water in and out. So now you're not only wasting it, but you're also paying for it.
But that's one of the things, that's our job, right? As we go through and you talk back about the design, that's us to think about that, right? As we go through that, we should be conscious of how much potentially could be lost and educating the client on it too.
So Jim, up on the first floor, we have a couple of rooms. They're all kind of segregated to the left here, powder room here, and then we have a pantry. In the pantry, we have these wall-mounted faucets, and I think this is kind of where we're introducing, they're all Vola fixtures, which are beautiful, but the roughs I was really impressed with. The downside of a in-wall, wall-hung faucet is the adjustability.
Yes.
And I can't tell you how many times I've ordered extension kits at the last minute, only for them to be weeks away. So have you worked with these fixtures
We
before?
have, yep.
What is my opinion on that close to yours?
Yeah, the guys in the field back 100 years ago when I installed the stuff, I would have been thrilled to death to be able to do that, because having the adjustability of that makes a lot of sense. All of a sudden something changes with the finishes or things like that. It's nice to know that you have the ability to adjust that as opposed to moving all of the plumbing.
Right. And I think what's nice is, they give this, as long as you're within that, it's going to work. Yellow is where you're going to have these extensions, and then the red-orange is basically like, hey, you really screwed this up.
But those are the type of things where everybody can own a piece of that, right? Because you guys are so engaged on the site, your guys are very attentive to detail. All of a sudden they look and they're like, oh, well done, right?
Yeah.
We gotta pay attention to this. And you could even let the stone people know, the tile people know.
Exactly.
Everybody can pay attention.
We don't have traditional shutoffs underneath the sink. If we had to service this, how would we go about doing that?
Well, a couple of things. So when we talk about the concerns of leaks, are we talking about an active leak, right? If something all of a sudden broke and leaked, right? So what we're doing in these days is we're actually putting leak detection systems in. So that way that shuts the water off. We don't have to worry about that.
And that, sorry to cut you off, but that leak detection system is back at the main in that water closet, right?
That's correct.
So if this thing starts leaking, we're just gonna shut the house down and be like, hey,
that's correct.
Let's fix the problem before you have any other water flowing through the house.
And the app lets you know, right? So there's all of these things, because a lot of times a lot of our clientele are traveling. There's a bunch of different things that have to be thought through. So that's a big piece for that.
Sure.
Serviceability of them, it's typically what happens is we usually know where the shutoffs are in the house. So usually we maintain the house after the fact. And any plumber that comes in here after the fact knows he can just go shut the water off downstairs.
High level, when we are thinking about quality of fixtures and, Vola's a very high spec, what are the things that you're considering as a plumber? Because we're going to send that to you and say, hey, are you good with that? And ultimately, you want to feel comfortable about what we're installing. What are the things that you're looking for?
So one of the things that's interestingly enough is how difficult it is to install, because there are a lot of different brands out there and some of them are extremely complicated. We'll put some in and your typical shower valve, you go back to how it used to be and you'd put a tub and shower valve in, it'd take you a half hour, 45 minutes. We do valves now that take a day.
Yeah.
Right? Because the intricacies, there's so many pieces and parts to them. One of the nice things about these is it's a self-contained unit, so you mount it to the wall, tie the hot and cold in, and you walk away. So sometimes the manufacturer has done some of the thinking for you, which makes things nice if it's a single unit, right? If you get into, when we get into the master shower, it's a different game.
I was gonna say, we got one that took a little bit of time. So in the kitchen here, we have obviously our kitchen layout. Up on the wall here, we have our pot filler.
Yep.
One of the biggest issues I've seen with the pot fillers in the past is these are typically exterior walls. So in our case, the questions come up, it's like, how are you putting plumbing on the exterior wall? In this case, we have 11 inches of insulation, 5 of it being on the outside, 5.5 on the 10.5 inches. Sorry, not 11. 5.5 inches on the inside. So we have a completely well-insulated cavity behind it. The failure is typically because you're taking away from that insulation and that wall gets real cold and freezes these up.
That's correct.
Is there anything else that you're considering when it comes to installing a pot filler, the do's and don'ts?
There's really not. We always push for it, right? Anybody we'll ask the question, you're a cook, right? Do you enjoy it?
I'm going to add to that because it's like we ask the question, and when it's a no, we ask the question again.
Yes.
It's like, I think you're wrong.
Yep, absolutely. And you use better words than you're wrong, but you really strongly encourage that.
Sure, because you seem to like pasta.
Yes,
a lot,
exactly.
So this is obviously the same spec. We're not doing any gas-fired appliances, but our sink is on the island.
Yep.
And I think that this is something that, island code for electrical and plumbing, I feel like continue to evolve. But, what we have here is essentially what I'll call our wet wall. And then we have this essentially floating sink here, which will have a disposal and things like that. But you walk me through what we have here, because this is, only part of what the system actually requires in terms of how it performs from draining and venting.
Yep, so what happens in an island situation like this for a fixture, so we use what's called a bow vent, which is a venting setup that you have to ask permission for the plumbing inspector to do that. And typically they okay it, it's fine. It's one of the things that it's been engineered, it's been proven over the years that it functions just fine. So what this does is actually allows the drain and then it converts into a vent. So it does a U-turn, and now the drain and the vent are connected together, and then it drops down, and then that vent goes up somewhere else.
So, and that's doing, like you said, the U-turn, you're just putting that up at a certain height.
That's correct. You get up as high as you can is typically
what... Within this wet
within that wet wall,
But correct me if I'm wrong, it requires a clean out also on that vent side?
Yes. Yep. So we'll typically do that. And what you want to do is just make sure, because if anything ever backs up,
that's
fills back into there. And the way that vent is set up to drain. So if any water actually does go back into the vent, it drains back out. If you could see the plumbing downstairs, we can take a look at that if you want to. And you
so it drains back out, and then that also is tied back to a vertical stack. So you're really just relocating the vertical that goes out through the roof further down the line. And giving the opportunity where that vent also can act as a drain, as you mentioned.
Because typically what has to happen is they refer, and it gets a little technical when they start talking about the flood level rim of a fixture. So the flood level rim is actually the base and the top of the sink. So typically the vent is supposed to start about 6 inches above that is usually where you're allowed to turn or do anything. That's correct. It'd be very difficult to do.
In terms of the kitchen, the other things that we have are ice makers and refrigerators.
Yep.
So one of the things that, you know, I think is always important is putting an accessible shutoff. I think that a lot of times these shutoffs get installed where you got to pull the fridge out. Correct. And I think it seems so foolish to me. And you guys, on the back side, we have a pantry, and there's actually a shutoff on the very bottom of that wall.
Yep.
So you can shut that refrigerator off.
Well, there's so much stress that goes into it, to be honest. What's the flow worth, right? So there's all of these things that we're going to be doing in that moment. If you could take just one piece of it of being able to shut that water off, because you don't know, the line could have got hung up.
Yeah.
Those refrigerators are very heavy. You pull it, you could snap the line off. There's a lot of things
Everything's
that can go
built
wrong.
in here.
That's
It's like
correct.
you're not sliding a refrigerator out.
Right.
You're calling someone and asking them to move it out.
Correct.
The one appliance I actually skipped over was the dishwasher.
Yep.
Is there anything special that you guys are doing or considering when hooking up a dishwasher?
For serviceability, just try to make it as convenient as you can, because a lot of times, honestly, when it comes to servicing a dishwasher, it's not going to be us. Plumbers don't typically service the dishwasher itself.
Yeah.
So you like to think of the appliance guy that has to come to be able to shut that off, make it easier for him to disconnect things. It's stuff like that. Sometimes it gets a little tight underneath the kitchen sink. You know, you're limited on space. But if you're, again, back to planning, if you're thinking about it, you can lay it out for the next guy to make it so the serviceability of the appliances, like you did with the stop,
Right.
makes a big difference.
On another project, we didn't have the ability to put a shutoff for the fridge behind it. We actually ran it back to under the sink. So when you opened it up, you actually had the dishwasher shut off, you had the hot and cold shut off, and then you had an ice maker shut off. So I think, you know, properly locating those shutoffs make a big difference.
It's huge for long term, right? That's what we try. We try to set up the success not just for now, but for long term.
Yeah. Jim, on the outside, not something that we typically see here in Massachusetts. So we opted to do an outdoor kitchen. So we have our hot, our cold, and our drain coming out of the wall.
Yep.
What are the things that we need to consider with when you have an outdoor sink, especially in a climate that can be 0 degrees in the winter?
First of all, there's nothing better than having an outdoor sink, especially when you're
Amen.
grilling and doing whatever you're doing. It's so nice to have a sink outside.
I can't tell you how much steak juice I've dripped on the floor, and my wife is just like, come on.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Right? So that's a huge piece of it, first of all. Secondly, it's winterization, right? So the thing is, when you have a luxury like this, which is truly having a sink outside like this is a luxury, right?
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you keep the trades involved, right? This goes back to concierge service. This goes back to one of the services that you offer, right? We make sure that the client gets taken care of after the fact, right? So we'll come, this will be set up to be winterized. So basically we'll drain everything down, put some antifreeze in the P-trap that sits underneath here, and that way that unit's shut down for the winter, so they don't have to worry about anything freezing.
Yeah, so this is not really tied to the circulating pump. This is like a dedicated line back to.
That's correct.
Because it's so close to the water heater, number one.
Yep.
But it's also you want this to operate completely separately from the rest of the system in the home.
And it's not that it doesn't necessarily work completely separate, but what it is it's allowed to be isolated from everything else, right?
Yes.
So that's what we do. We make sure you can isolate that, shut this down. It's no different than your irrigation system, right? So you shut the irrigation the same way.
Oh, well, what if I don't have concierge? Like, what if I don't have someone to shut my luxury sink down? But the truth is, you have hose bibs and irrigation. At the minimum, you have hose bibs.
That's correct.
So you got to be winterizing those anyway. So if you're thinking about winterizing the hose bibs, this just becomes one additional feature here to make sure that you're winterizing.
Yeah, if you want to be handy, it's one of those things that you can go back and take care of yourself. But I mean, at the end of the day, even away from concierge, just the general plumber in the neighborhood or whoever you typically would use to come out and do that, it's typically part of a service plan that they can come out and take care of that for you.
But hose bibs, we're using the Aqua hose bib, which is really nice. It's that flush mounted quick connect system. Have you used those before?
So it's funny you say that because I stole the idea from you. We used it on one other project at Verndale, but there's one going in my house in the spring, so I'm putting one in there.
You know, a couple things I love about the Aqua is, number one, they're super sleek looking. We have this incredible Peterson cladding on this house. At one point sketched through what a typical hose bib might look like. It didn't feel right. The sleekness made a big difference. The quick connect is amazing. But from a frost protection, there's a couple things I learned that I didn't know. We talk about copper coming in the house. You know, a lot of those hose bibs are copper and brass coming out, and you have a lot of failure with them. And correct me if I'm wrong, but stainless actually is way better from a frost protection standpoint.
So it's interesting when you say frost. So that's what we always have these conversations about the outside faucets. So they're called frost-free for a reason. They're not called freeze-free, right? So they still will freeze, but what you have is you have a faucet that it's a little bit different because even though the faucet turns on and off right at the spout, The stem itself is much further back into the house typically on those units. I think we ordered 12s for here, I believe is what we have. So that water gets shut off 12 inches into the house. That's the other big plus of using that type of a faucet.
Right.
And that way you make sure, typically when you shut off, I'm not going to say this because people will do it, you should still shut it off inside and drain it.
Yes.
But it allows a little bit of forgiveness, honestly.
Yeah, and if you've ever seen an aqua work, when you pull that disconnect out for about a second or two, you actually have water dripping out from that fixture, and that's because, what Jim said, it's being shut off 12 inches back, and then on this wall, that means we're in the envelope where it is heated, and we're getting all of that water out so it doesn't freeze.
Correct.
On the outside.
Yep.
So we have 5 bedrooms up here, 4 bathrooms, but I think, in my opinion, the most impressive is the primary.
Always.
And the primary is right here, and it's all blue marble, which I think is I mean, obviously beautiful, but requires really, really careful planning. So you were talking about shower valve placement and understanding where that goes. This is like why. And so thinking about where we're at here, we'll come back to this side, but shower, wet room, tub room, whatever you want to call it, it's this massive, I think it's about 6 by 12 or 6 by 13. And then we have these 13-foot ceilings, which, speaking of which, we have our shower head. So I don't know if I ever told you, I end up, Vola sold me their longest shower head. Someone had said the ideal position of that shower head above someone was X amount of inches. And I'm short like 2 inches or something like that. We went through this iteration of, can you make one longer? Can we custom fabricate it? Can we connect them? Ultimately, we just said, you know what, we'll just turn the water up a little bit hotter and we should be fine. So very dramatic with the blue Celeste marble here. And then you flip around and you have your handheld and then all of your valving here, down low here, which is kind of tucked behind the glass. When you're thinking about these upscale showers, wet rooms, things like that, what are those things that you're really questioning and making sure that you have an understanding of before getting into actually doing the plumbing?
It's always about the hot water. Honestly, that's a big thing, right? To make sure that, I mean, because we've seen them over the years and they've toned it down a little bit, but we used to, jokingly, we refer to them as car washes, right? You remember the days, body sprays everywhere, there was all of this stuff, and literally to drain a water heater that fast. I mean, the water wouldn't last very long at all. Now we have to be a little more conservative with regards to what we do, and again, back to clients' expectations. We just want to make sure they understand if you turn everything on, there's a huge drawer on the hot water in the house, so that's a big piece for us.
And the tub.
Correct.
You know, the tub, like this is a Kohler T for2 tub, it's a big tub. Takes a lot of water.
Correct.
And I think about in some of the old homes we've lived in, you fill up that tub for that one kid.
Yep.
That next kid's getting a cold tub.
That's correct. Yeah.
So same thing. You have to think about filling that tub and maintaining the heat in it. We're prepped for a double vanity.
Yep.
You are stubbing out with copper. So I know behind that is PEX. Why switch back to copper?
We like the connection, and it's much more rigid. So you'll see applications where they'll stub it out. I'm never happy with how strong that connection is because it moves around. And oddly, once the sink's in there, typically it's fine. But you never know. You get you go get an aggressive teenager slamming something under there or whatever it takes, whatever they're doing underneath that sink. You got to be careful of those connections because that's where you run into your issues.
Yeah. So this is going to give you actually you can see.
Yeah, you can see how tight it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're bolted back to the framing.
That's correct.
Once you cut those, you're putting chrome stops
with escutcheons on there to make it nice and clean underneath there.
You have the stops that you can kind of turn a handful of times versus the quarter turn. I keep getting conflicting kind of, not even opinion on it, but just like, hey, we're required to do quarter turn, and other places are like, no, we don't want the quarter turn.
Yep. I think it's a preference, to be perfectly honest, and sometimes it's availability if you plan far enough ahead. Some companies use nothing but quarter turns. Other companies will use the standard stop that typically goes under the sink.
So I think really just comes down to preference.
I think it's a preference. For me, like you think it's easier, right? Just a quarter turn makes it simple at the end of the day. So.
Yeah. Matt asked me a question about our wall-hung toilets.
Yep.
What height do you want it? And he asked me a bunch of times. One of those things where like, I don't know. Like, I don't think about it. And ultimately we decided on something, but beyond that, when you're thinking about wall-hung toilets, what's the benefit or the downside of using them?
Honestly, the big benefit is cleanliness. When you got young boys in the house, you know, let's be practical, right? Let's be honest about how it works, right? It's nice to be able to clean underneath everything. You're not dealing with a lot of the stuff that you deal with a conventional toilet. It makes it a lot nicer. The other thing I like, it's a much cleaner look overall, not just for the cleanliness, but the way it looks on the wall. It helps you with depth, right? Because you don't have the tank depth to deal with. Sometimes we'll have tighter bathrooms that we want to open a door a certain way, and this allows you to do that as well.
You're taking up a lot less square footage, like when you have small spaces. You know, we don't have small bathrooms here, but all of the toilets are in their own closets.
That's correct.
So it makes that space feel a lot larger. When someone's installing that, is there anything that you see that people screw up or miss or don't consider when installing them?
Lagging it, right? So the lagging of it is crucial. I'm always, as many holes as they give you, put a lag in it, right? So make sure that it holds good. The wall that's behind it, what you put on the wall, like our guys constantly, we always want to see tile, we don't want to see plastered, because sometimes people will just want to do a plastered wall behind it, and there's still some, there's still some flex in that, right? So you get Durarock on there and tile, you got a pretty rigid, surface to mount that toilet.
Yeah, you think about kind of like a lever, that bowl sitting, against the wall on the bottom edge. You put a lot of force on that front edge. It's going to want to rock.
That's correct.
So I think even if you are doing plaster, what I've seen in the past is they'll block the very bottom of that.
Correct.
So at the bottom of that bowl underneath, that's going to be all solid blocking. So you can.
Yeah, so it doesn't flex like that. You got to know the finish.
In terms of height, once board's up, it's done, right?
Correct. Well, again, once board is up, board is board. Once tile is up and we get beyond that point, then it gets pretty expensive to do that.
Right.
But adjusting the heights, and I always find this kind of funny because handicap height is really what we're setting toilets to, which now everybody's coined the phrase comfort height.
Comfort height, yeah.
It's actually the old handicap height is really what we do. But you do in these toilets, you don't have to go all the way up to the 18. You can drop it down a little bit more. You can even go a little, because depends on the clientele. We have some tall clients, some really tall clients.
Right.
And at the end of the day, they may want the toilet up as high as you can get it.
Yeah, and it's funny because like some of the people I had asked, I'm like, what height preference? And they were leaning towards the lower one.
Right.
And then I was like, yeah, but you're a smaller person.
Yes.
So I can understand why that might be.
And it depends on their age too. As they get older, you appreciate the comfort height toilets. You definitely do.
You get them up too high, you look like a kid with your feet swinging around.
Exactly.
In the primary bedroom, we actually installed a wet bar. So just from a code perspective, is there anything to consider when you're adding a sink to a bedroom? Is it straightforward like that?
No, it's pretty straightforward. And actually, you look back in history, there used to be sinks in bedrooms all the time.
Probably not for your expensive coffee maker, but...
That's correct. So the expensive coffee maker is one of those things, like again, we're adding to that. It's nice to not even have to go downstairs to get your cup of coffee in the morning. You can't, how do you knock that?
Lastly, so we have 3 other bathrooms. They're all pretty similar for the ensuite, but the laundry room...
Yep.
We are seeing more and more of these laundry rooms up on the 2nd floor. People are requesting because it becomes more usable, right? Rather than bringing this stuff down to the basement. At least for me, all of my thought goes into how do we prevent a disaster? We are standing above the kitchen. We saw the wood ceiling going in. You made a reference on what that wood ceiling is worth. One of the things that we brought to you guys is this Killarney zero entry appliance pan. All stainless steel, 1-inch lip. This trough here ends up sitting flush with your subfloor, and then our hardwood floor actually is going to tuck in behind it and then on the front. So as you push your machine in, you're going to slide right across that trench drain on the front and your machine sits in it. Well, the other options was the sheet metal fabricated pans and plastic, which you need 2 guys to lift the machine up and in, and you damage them. Yeah. I can't tell you how many plastic pans crack, and then it's like, well, now we gotta take it out.
Correct.
It's not gonna do its job. So the zero entry is huge. It's also got this inch outlet, which is gonna tie into this 1-inch drain here. You can leave that in the video. Walk me through where this 1-inch drain goes. That ties in really nice to what this drain is designed for, not so much a catastrophic event, but like a machine event.
Correct. So it'll catch some smaller stuff, smaller leaks. So what happens typically in this, and it happens a lot with condensate from your other appliances when you talk about your furnaces, your air handlers, even your water heater now.
Sure.
So you have condensate that goes to that. So what happens is, this one we're lucky because we're up on the 2nd floor, so it can drain by gravity downstairs. years
Sure.
into an indirect trap that we have set up in the basement in the mechanical room.
So when you say indirect trap, what does that mean?
So what happens is it's not tied in directly. So if you look underneath your sink, it's tied directly to the drain that's underneath. What an indirect drain does is it allows for an air gap. And what that does is now the water can't flow back up, right? So if it's flowing down, it's not directly connected to it. It won't rise all the way up if there's a stoppage or something like that.
Obviously, if nothing goes into that drain, that trap can dry out.
That's correct.
How do you work around that? Like, how do you prevent that from ever, drying up? Really?
So there's a combination of two things you can do. One, it depends on the appliances you're using, because if you have an appliance that gives condensate year-round, you don't have to worry about that. So no matter what, you're going to have condensate in there. If not, what we do by plumbing code is we put a trap primer in, and what you do is you pick a fixture that's close by, and every time someone turns a faucet on or flushes a toilet, it'll give a little slug of water, and it'll dump it into that trap.
So
and that typically keeps it sealed.
So really, you're priming it with one or the other.
That's correct.
Whether it's condensate, because this is ideally never going to see water.
That's
so you don't want to
correct.
have a trap below the floor, because then it's going to dry out, and you're going to be required to put, mineral oil or something in there that can't evaporate.
Yeah.
So it's better to have that open air trap.
And the setup that you have here, you'd have to treat this like a fixture. So you'd have to have a vent for it. It would turn into a whole nother thing,
Sure.
As opposed to just, this is a 1-inch line that just weaves its way down to the basement and dumps into the indirect drain.
So last thing, you mentioned that this is for small leaks. Everyone, had commented saying this would never handle the amount of water a washer machine would catastrophically produce. If that hose were to fail or a fitting fail, how are we handling that situation? Because obviously that pan's not going to hold that much water.
That's correct. So it would wind up being twofold actually in this application. So we'll put a leak detection device on the washer machine itself. It's not on there yet. You'll see it on the finish. And what it does is it has a sensor that goes down into this nice pan we got here, and as soon as it detects a little bit of water, shuts right off. So if you think about it, if those hoses, which are in the back of the unit, when they burst, the water is going to drop down in that pan, right? So you're going to catch that water.
Sure.
That's going to hit it, and it's going to shut those valves off. Then you have the backup of a leak detection system down in the basement. So if all of a sudden that leak detection system sees an odd run of water at a time that it's not used to seeing, it will send you an alert, say, hey, there's water running. If you don't answer the alert, it automatically shut the water off for you.
Got it. So that's looking at on a flow.
Yes.
Like based on how much flow is happening.
That's
this
correct.
machine is going to pull a certain amount of flow, and then if it's exponentially more, it's like that's probably a leak.
That's correct.
And then, like you said here, this is one of the things that we did actually. We want this to be a finished space. We have the room. We've recessed all of our shutoffs back in the wall.
Yep.
We'll have a nice access panel here, but you'll have a mechanical device.
That's correct.
Which goes to a sensor, which I refer to as a water bug.
Yes.
So if there's water in that pan, those contacts basically feel that.
Yep.
And then shut that off.
Shut the water off and give you an audible alarm to let you know that there has been a leak.
Right. And I think the one thing I'll add to that is oftentimes we try to hide these shutoffs, which is great. But if it shuts off your water and you need to reset it, it's a pain in the butt to get to these. So it's a big reason why we try to keep them on the backsplash. And in this case, we have the benefit of being able to push it back and have a nice access panel. So it's super accessible when you do need to do a reset, but you're not looking at it all the time.
Correct.
Because until someone has something nicer looking, I think that's a good option.
Yeah, and we appreciate it greatly, right? It's one of those situations where when you have to get at it, we see them built in all the time, and there hasn't been that much thought in when we built them in, right?
Yeah.
It was aesthetics only, it wasn't functionality,
Totally aesthetics.
right?
Yeah.
So
it's a good blend.
Yep.
Guys, appreciate you watching. Hopefully that answers a bunch of your questions around the plumbing system in this home. We'll do a couple different episodes following this as we get into the finishes. We obviously have all of our fixtures that we're going to be installing, which will take a fair amount of time, but will be extremely beautiful in the overall result of this project. If you guys are interested in building with us, fill in the form below. If you're another builder looking for inspiration, make sure you join our Modern Craftsman newsletter. Until the next episode, we appreciate you watching. Garbage disposals.
Yep.
What's your opinion on them?
Anytime you're grinding up waste and running it down a drain that's 1.5 inches or 2 inch, there's a chance you're going to fill it up. So not everybody flushes them through as thoroughly as they should, right?
So how should they flush them through?
They literally, for me, if I was using a garbage disposal, I would fill the sink up and flush everything that you dump down that drain. I would do that on a
Fill the sink up.
Yep. Every once in a while. I'm not saying you have to do it all the time, but what happens is people don't think about it.
Someone's going to comment and be like, "There's the wasted water."
You get into the world of plumbing, right? So people, again, what people want as opposed to what's efficient. So one of the things about flushing out that drain, you can do one of two things. flush it on a regular basis or have it maintained by a drain cleaning company.
Got it.
Because no matter what we do, you're still going to get buildup when they grind up that waste, grease, everything. You think about how greasy chicken is and stuff like that. It's going to build up in that drain.
Is it true that ice helps?
In social media, yeah. At the end of the day, right, it's one of those things.
I do it once a month. I fill it with ice, Dawn dish soap, and a couple lemons.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's brand new.
I'll check in on that. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not gonna sign off on that one.
Okay, fair. Other question I have that happens in the kitchen all the time is boiling water.
Yep.
So, boiling water flying down a PVC drain. Are we running the risk of blowing that PVC apart?
You're not. No, you're not. But you shouldn't. To be perfectly honest, dumping the boiling water out of a pot of pasta or whatever you're making, when you think about it, so it dumps into there's a kind of a bin where the disposal is, right?
Yep.
So it sits in there. Then it hits the trap. There's a little bit of water in there, so it starts to cool the water off a little bit there. And it wouldn't hurt. Nobody does it, but it wouldn't hurt to throw the cold water on at the same time. The pipe is more than rated for that temperature of water, or we wouldn't allow it, right?
Got it.
So
yeah, I think that comes up a lot, and I've always said just run the cold water.
Yep.
Run the cold water before you start, and run it while it's going down the drain, and that's my professional advice of how you prevent it.
But that is it's an interesting thing because that is another thing that would scour that drain. So when you dump that hot water down there, a lot of times whatever's in there waste-wise, it'll free it up and actually have that run down, so the water chasing it isn't such a bad idea.
All right, fair enough.